G'day, my name's Sydney. I have with me four wonderful people. I won't get them to do it again because I've got them to do it twice in the last 3 hours. I have Ellen, Haley, Tyler, and V. We played Dust Wardens, and this is our chat about the system. We're just going to kind of talk about what our experiences were, what we felt, and where we kind of did have conflict with the system and where it really helped us out. So yeah, I think I don't know if I really want to direct this. I'm really bad at feedback stuff. I tell you what, if I was smart, I would have roped V into this and been like, hey, V, can you do the labor for me? But unfortunately, this is where we are. So I think what I'm really interested in hearing from you is what was the scene or the section where you thought, oh, I'm playing Dust Wardens. This is what it's about. This is what this game is supposed to be. This is what I want this game to be. Where was that moment in our story?
For me, it was the big finale, because we not only were we like playing the game and using the rules and drawing cards, but we're also like hitting on those vows, and we were making all the feels. So it was a really nice gelling of what I like in games.
I'll be honest, I think the fight at the hangar may have been that moment it really hit. Every one of us did such interesting things, and that whole extended scene just really hit it for me. Everybody was so on point, and it seemed like that's what the rules wanted. The pulling on those strings of our vows and our loyalties and facing something combined. That one really hit for me.
Me too.
I echo that also.
Yes, and I won't stray too much from that, but I think that session being a one self-contained did feel like it had that sort of feel.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Sorry, did you want to unpack that?
Well, I feel like it was connected also, like that was the first session that Rico was introduced, right? So I felt like it added all these, and it was the first session, like it added a lot of plot, I guess, which helped directed, and that was directed around the vows we were doing, which really helped because we were making the vows as we were settling character, right, in that particular session, and gave it a lot of places to move, and everyone was able to fit into a mini arc in that session. So I think that's what helped me feel like that was the case. It's a little bit tough to do that when you aren't finding a new, like you aren't forming relationships around a new coven member, and you're exploring different aspects of the same relationship. Like in the third and fourth one, Ellen had to sort of play that role for us to get the antagonism, but I felt like that was very much Ellen took it upon herself to do that. Yeah, so it was interesting. Yeah, I don't know. That was.
I think in that first one too, the setting was really nicely laid out in that going into Spider's compound. When we had Goggles there doing his thing, and that really felt like the setting to me. I don't know if it felt as much like the deep emotion that came later, but it really conveyed that wasteland and scarcity sort of feel. I thought that was a really cool scene and neat for the setting, but probably not as much for the feels.
What did you think of your characters? Did you think that you guys found really nice like niches for your characters amongst each other? Would you have felt more comfortable with like playbooks where like True could have picked the rock solid and Elle could have picked the Shimmerer and like had a little bit more like defined edges to your character.
I like playbooks. So I wouldn't think that it would hurt my experience. I was perfectly happy doing what we did, but I also would not have been against having defined playbooks.
I mean, yeah, well, that's kind of a little bit why I went hard, because I don't know if it was the mood that I was feeling like in that third session, or like if it was a result of feeling a bit lost with my character and like not feeling like I didn't know who I was, so therefore my character didn't know who she was. Yeah, I think maybe playbooks could have helped me nut that out earlier, but you know, would it have been as fun? I don't know.
Haley,
Sorry,
you were waiting to go. Would you like to?
She's going to town about Frame first.
I think it comes down to what the game wants to be. If it wants to be kind of loosey-goosey and episodic, then I think that there's enough of it that you let people just tell a story. But if you're wanting to have length, then it could use some support for the players to grasp onto, and playbooks give that. I think it was perfectly fine to have personalities driving along with the system there just to resolving conflict. We knew what was kind of the underlying thing. We were just personalities going through it with stats on moves. If you want to have something, though, where you dig into that character, it's going to evolve into something more. There isn't a lot there that does that. And that's what a playbook can kind of provide. I'm not saying which one I think is better. I think there's something kind of charming about the looseness of this game. I think we found a whole lot to dig into with just character. But, I don't know if every group would do that. I don't know how quickly accessible that is to most people. I think most people might have some issues with that much freedom, that much looseness.
Well, like maybe if it's what we did have there, like the prompts, I think helped really define us, like choosing our gear. Like if you look back on what gear we all chose, that helped really define our characters. So whether it's like, like character class type playbooks, or if it is more of that, this is what your character could use to, drive it. But yeah, just fill in the gaps.
Personally, I felt like I could have used a little bit more support in creating my character. I didn't feel like that support has to come from playbooks. I totally reckon Tyler hit the nail on the head when he said it depends what the game wants to be. There has to be something, like, I guess there has to be something that changes, in my opinion, to give this game the ability to be played for many sessions. Whether that comes from playbooks or comes from the vowels is, like, I think probably the two strongest options for that. My preference as a really, really story game person would be for it to come from the vowels, because that's what I love, right? That's the heart and the meat of the connection between the characters in this. And I think that the vowel system could be developed. But I could also see it coming from a playbook and a bit more traditional Apocalypse Worldy type approach.
Well, why not both? Yeah.
Yeah, playbooks as a GM also give me a lot of assistance as well, because when you pick, I want to be the lover captain, you tell me a lot of what you want to see in the story. You tell me a lot of like what you desire. Without that, that was very difficult, and it was also, it's also very difficult to like direct those vows before we get into play. The vows that came up during play were really good and really, really sung. The vows that we created beforehand were not nearly as connected to our story and not nearly as much of what we wanted, which is, I don't think that's particularly surprising. I was interested about change. So during play, I noticed that harm and injuries and stuff is look, it's very Tyler made the point. Here's the scene. Winged serpent bites in. Rot, death, lightning, all this sort of stuff. Do you have any injuries? Not really. Well, like we could have given you some, but like, is that? Yeah. So I felt like harm was something that was really weakly modeling mechanically what it was doing fictionally. What about growth? Because there's no like XP, there's no change, that sort of thing. Did you feel like you would have liked a way to model growth mechanically in your character?
I found the vows as really strong drivers.
Mhm.
Like I didn't find it might have just been because we were getting distracted with other things. The process of like resolving a vow and then like making a new one, or like how that is done to help everyone grow. I don't know.
It seems like it's not a story about the individual and your growth, right? It's a story about your growth as a team. Is kind of which is where those vows come through.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it because I read it in the game text somewhere where it was like, this game isn't about like leveling up, but it's about like your vows that you make, or like your relationships growing. So I would have liked to see more mechanical stuff around our relationships growing, right? I felt like I felt like in our playthrough that our relationships did grow, but it wasn't tracked in the vows. Like once we completed some of those, I wasn't sure what happened, if that replaced it or if we reached another level. I would have liked something to mechanically happen to support that.
Yeah, I get.
Direct that.
I'm with you on that one. So like maybe if you were doing a move that, you know, played into one of those vows, you get an extra card for however many vows you're playing into. Or like, you know, if you achieve a vow, then you get a free card to use on whatever one you want. I don't know, but I would like something like that too.
Yeah, it's interesting because it says so to develop their relationship with each other. So yes, I want to develop those relationships. Developing them means like that ties into doing the vows with them. What does fulfilling a vow do for you? It gives you an ace, so you can do more cool shit, like to help you succeed in roles. But that's not what I'm interested in. I wonder if it's like that's it ties into like being, you know, your own skills and powers in the end is what you get out of fulfilling vows, which is not what I want out of them. I want a scene. I want True and Patti Smith scene dancing, which for the sheer joy of that. Or a scene where if you do have that, you have to, you make that a big thing, or you highlight that moment in some way. I don't know. That's.
I obviously don't want to, try and design someone's game. But we mentioned once before, like we liked those aces a lot and what they did. Having some expansion off of that, And we found we stumbled into magic that had a theme in a lot of ways. Each of us sort of had a certain thing that our magic did. Maybe having, rather than playbooks, have your flavor of magic be something that helps define the character, and then maybe have something like the way those aces are. When you fulfill a vow, you get something that when you pull this particular card, you know, this is now, you've gotten the ace of hearts, or, well, like the queen of hearts. You did something, it gives, whenever you happen to draw that queen of hearts, it does some extra effect for you. And then that means that, you know, these vows are adding stuff to your personal deck use. They're still going to be fairly rare. You're going to have to be the one who pulls it. Might could play into someone else pulling it while you're in scene or something. But that gives that plays with the card mechanic already and gives that little extra zoom of, you know, the vows have paid off a thing. But again, I hesitate to ever add complications to what somebody's already designing. It's like, well, just go out there and work a whole bunch more for me so that there are 50-something more awesome things.
Yeah, like ground up, right? Like if you could redesign someone's game, everything would be solved. I'd just give my games to Haley and V and be like, award-winning, please. So that's really interesting, and I think that so shuffling when you complete a vow, you reshuffle the deck, which was like, that was really good, really effective once. But that is what are the monsters? I'll answer that in a second. But that feels weird because I think there's a lot to be said for how complex your vows are. And the fact that that's a completely player-driven thing is kind of okay. But I kind of I think it definitely puts a lot of load on the players to create and then play into their vows, because it wasn't my it feels weird as a GM to be like, and now the bloodflower scene. You two dance for my amusement. That's kind of not what, like, I want the players to drive toward their own desires, and I want to set up conflict in front of that desire, but I don't want to. If the purpose of the vows were more clear, they'd be easy to create. And I think like if the purpose of the vows was more clear at like a story level as well, about like how many vows we expected to fulfill during this session of play, or like, or are we, expected to fulfill vows constantly? I promise to have your back the next time you get into a fight, versus I promise to never ever leave your side. So in a lot of ways, vows are flags. Really good point there, because they are. But they're very non-specific flags. The flags in something like Dungeon World, which is where I've used flags before, are a lot easier because everyone knows what Dungeon World is when they walk into it. Everyone's like, cool, we're going to go into a dungeon and we're going to fight a lich. And so it's like, my flag is get yourself in danger so that I can rescue you or whatever. Yeah. Anyway, how are the monsters? The monsters are rough. Monsters are so two things are really good. The injuries into smite system is really good. That works perfectly for what it needs to do, which is you just do a bunch of cool shit, and then it goes into creating injuries, and then those injuries get smited. The monsters don't really feel like they have teeth on you as characters, because the only thing I can really do is injure you, and injuries are very easily resolved, and there's not like a lot of threat, which is kind of rough if it wants to be a Monster of the Week game, for the monsters to not be particularly scary. But that's also because I don't think death is the stake of this game a lot, so it doesn't want to push towards that. But yeah, it does need increased personal stakes for some reason in the monstery combat-y bit of it. Their actual combat is really cool. Like we had some really, really cool bits and people helping each other, and like it gets this cool superhero setup system where like I put the blood flower in you and then you hit the thing and then I cast lightning and then you do this, and like that was really cool. Yes, Fellowship is a good place to look for that. Fellowship, the like Tolkien-esque game that does a very similar thing with its combat. But in terms of giving those monsters teeth and life, that was laborious. That was all stuff that I did. And that's why we unfortunately have things like snake odies, which are shit, and they're shit because that was me trying to like sprinkle magic into something and not having my feet underneath me. It's just they were fun, right? They were fun.
And at the same time, you did such an amazing job with that hangar fight because that monster seemed terribly threatening, and the combat worked. That combat really worked.
Yeah, no, I absolutely think that combat did work. I think that a lot of it was like player and GM labor over system labor, though, which is also good. Like it's good to have that bit of flexibility, right? New things. I think there is an issue with this will be the first time I speak about the moves, but hopefully won't be the last. There is an issue with there only being one real move for like I hurt things or I generate injuries being apply force. The moves get a little bit torn up, a little bit caught up together between what I'm doing and what outcome I want to generate, and are a little bit confused there. Where like using channel as like if I want to cast a spell to generate an injury, am I channeling or am I applying force, or am I facing my fear, or am I or if I'm using magic on my bike to do it, am I using get equipped? Like it's all a whole thing.
I think like this is gonna sound pretty basic, but in a lot of ways, like this game needs to find out what it's about, like the heart of the game, which I think is really clear. Like as in, like I think we've said a lot of times that we feel like this game is about the relationships between the characters, the difficulties, but also the beauty and the love of being a coven, and the promises that they make to each other. And I think like the game could benefit a lot from being rewritten with that perspective in mind in basically every single aspect of the game. Like pretty much. I think there's a lot there that's awesome to work with. Like the vows are great, but they need to help you be able to bring that into play more. And the moves, most of them don't further that purpose at all.
I think from a moves perspective, I would. So this uses very much core Apocalypse World moves for a lot of it. I would look at these moves compared to Night Witches, which Night Witches is a game about connections and stuff. And I'm certainly not saying to take those whole cloth, but what I'm saying is when you look at Night Witches day moves and you see the difference between those and the Apocalypse World moves, you see the difference between a game that's about relationships and a game that's about a community surviving under force and applying force against things. I will say from a GM perspective, this is just my experience, and I think a lot of it is who we are as a play culture and that sort of stuff. I would say that everything I said was the least interesting stuff for me in the game. If I could have just said, we're playing Dust Wardens, you are 4 motorcycle witches who have needs for each other, your power comes from being together, but maybe that's difficult off your pop. I would have watched that. I would have watched that all day because that's what I wanted. I wanted like all the conflicts and having monsters for you to fight and stuff like that is kind of cool, but it's only ever cool when it's, for me, when it's an expression of what's happening inside your group. And yeah, I think that I don't know how you felt, like whether you ever felt like lost or unsure as characters, and like you wanted to. Well, actually, Ella, you did say you did feel that a bit, and whether I could have been more heavy-handed as a GM to help out. Like if I could have lent on that and maybe framed scenes harder or given you a quest, like a more clear quest.
A more clear quest probably would have been more like, probably wouldn't have been that much fun. Like I enjoyed watching you pull these threads from whatever we had come up with, and I don't think you could have like known that I felt lost, and I didn't think that it was something upon you to resolve. Like I, as like a player for my character, I just felt I didn't know what she wanted. But you could have asked, like you said, but I don't know. I don't know what I would have said to that question.
I'll say there were moments during the course of the game where, and this is, I'm going to give both sides of this. I love the kind of dreamy quality that we didn't really know why we were going or where we were going. And we were doing that in Discovery. But it also meant there were times in the middle where I didn't know what was the right thing to do to help the story. Now, I don't know if that means there should be some mechanical writer's room idea of saying, on a meta level, okay, where do we want to drive? What is this sort of meaning? Or if it does play better where, you're kind of just forming it as you go. But there were definitely times like when, because as we've probably all learned, if there's a silence for any length of time, I will start talking. And so if I would be first, I would feel compelled to talk, but not know what to say. And so there were aspects of that.
I've also got another topic once we're ready to move on from this one.
So do I. You go first.
I just wanted to say one thing I really did enjoy was the gear system. I really liked how the gear is defined by different numbers of adjectives. That was really cool. And there are 2 basic moves that are about equipment and gear, I think. And was my character like the only one who was interacting with those? I felt like you guys liked that, and I was like, oh, because I had a lot of fun with those rules. And
yeah. So there was 2 moves for gear, but only 1 move for magic, which for like a game about witches, like
I found that confusing too.
And so like I was only at like, okay, so I want to do this, I guess I'll channel it. Like there probably could have been more options, but then how many moves do you want?
And it leans heavy into that gear for balance sake. Gear is not only a stat for 2 moves, it is the gear you have, and it's the descriptions of the gear you have. So, I mean, it's, for balance sake, it's uber powerful.
Mm-hmm. But it's a lot of fun as well. Yeah.
And I suppose, like, Tyler, if you look at it in that sense, like, gear has that power, but magic doesn't. So we have to describe gear to that kind of level, but we don't ever, like, initially describe our magic to that level.
Yeah, you never have to use a certain number of adjectives for your glamour, right? Yeah. Sorry, I'll keep going. I didn't mean to.
No.
I just got excited. I'm so sorry. I'm so glamour. That's really interesting because I did love and I do want to applaud that Tinker move, and like having that intimate conversation, allowing you to choose 2 was really cool. That was a beautiful connection there, and very story gamey, and I loved that so much. And I kind of want to see Magic do the same thing, right? Like, here's the thing. The biggest issue I have is the game says, in this world, love is magical power. And then I look to the move and it says, weave a spell, state your intent, draw with glamour. And at no point does it say, like, weave a spell, kiss someone, and then draw with glamour, right? Like, it doesn't say, I would love it if you could only cast a spell with someone else, or like you could only do something if you could only use that move if you had fulfilled a vow with someone or something like that. Like, I want to see the idea that connections are power and loneliness is disempowerment hit in those moves a bit harder. Yeah.
Do you think the interesting thing would be it puts strains on the vows? Or do you think that it's more of an association with the vows?
I think at that point I'm probably getting a little bit too deep into designing the game for what I want it to look like instead of designing it for what Nora wants it to look like. But I would say that I think this is the kind of game where I would want it to be home fronty. Like, we both have to do the move together, and then you choose the success and I choose the cost, or something like that. But that's because that's the design space that I'm living in at the moment. And other people would think different things. You know, someone before said, oh, it was Elle. I thought it was Haley. Said, like, completing a vow should be like a monologue token, right? And I was like, that's what the story brewers would say, because that's the design space they're living in at the moment. These are like all monologues, tokens, and resolve tokens, which I love. I want to talk about NPCs. We had like one NPC and you blew him up, and then I didn't put any other real NPCs in there because you shouldn't feel attacked. I read you. I didn't put any other NPCs in there because every time, so there's settlement rules and there's rules about like making a community, and I would have loved to have seen you like enter a community, but what I wanted to see was time between you together, and I never felt like I needed to put you in a community to have those. Like, Rico's hangout, right, was so much better as this solitary space where you could all interact with each other with that freedom and time to be alone and all that sort of stuff than it would have been if it was like in the middle of a bustling township, as far as I believe. What do you think about like NPCs or other people in this environment?
So there's one aspect to this story that we never ever actually got to delve into, and that was that idea that we had come from somewhere and we were no longer welcome there. And that is the only way in which I missed NPCs. Like, in every single other way, I felt, I mean, we did only play 4 sessions and V came in the second session to essentially give us more diversity in our cast, I guess. But in every other way, I felt like the drama being between us was really cool. But I did like miss that sense of why we were who we were.
Yeah, that's something not necessarily to do with NPCs from my point of view, but like the origin story of like why we met or how we met, or like maybe like we could have like an overarching vow for the coven itself that we all pledge. Like, I agree that we were kind of playing but without a beginning.
I see elements of or a story that could be told a little like Dogs in the Vineyard sort of thing with communities. Rather than coming in and being all powerful law figures, coming in as that sort of harbinger of doom, that outcast that comes in and either straightens things out or brings in trouble. But that I could see as an interesting story dealing with the communities out there. There's never a home you're going to find with these communities because the coven is your home. That I could see being an interesting story bit for NPCs and community.
Yeah, maybe it's something about like, you know, having to describe like where your coven practices, like where's your coven space. That could like give you a whole bunch of material and build that feeling.
I agree 1,000%, and I don't say this in refutation of any of it, especially Haley, in your comment about like we never got to talk about where people came from. But when I sit here and think about it, and I'm really honest with myself, I wouldn't have given up any of the scenes that we had in order to do that. As correct as you are, but again, I think it goes back to that question about what's the game about. The game we wanted to play was the game about the internal dramas of the 4 or 5 witches. Tyler, you're absolutely right. There is a Dogs in the Vineyard-ish game here where you roll into like a town a week and you witch shit up as an outcast, and it's awesome. But that is a fundamentally different game, and again, like needs fundamentally different rules to do that. I can't see the like episodic go from place to place sort of thing working with vows the way that we played them, with them being large and looming things and large obligations between people. Yeah. Not to say that's not what the game could do. It'd just have to be framed really differently from the start. Does anyone else have points? I'm just looking at the time and realizing how late we're rolling here. Does anyone have any other points they would like to bring up? Considering Elle's already come up with the best idea. And like just to hit that point, like I think tying at the moment the coven doesn't exist except for in the 4 members that there are. Making it exist bigger than them with like a crew sheet, like a Blades in the Dark kind of crew sheet, is an option, but it also means that the coven is bigger than who you are individually, and I'm not sure if it's an interesting thing because a design decision would have to be made. Yeah. I did want to say as a final thing though that I love so much of what's going on here. I love the idea of it. I love the central conceit of the game. I love the idea of relationships being power. I think it's a space that is under-designed in at the moment. I think the metaphor of magic is beautiful. I think the card mechanic is amazingly good at what it does. I think that like the cards being a ticking clock that you refresh by fulfilling vows is phenomenal. I think there is so much good shit in here, and I think that its steps toward being the best game it can be are more about finding and highlighting the best bits that it wants rather than like cutting out any badness, right? That's my feelings on it. That's my opinion.
Yeah, it's all here. Like, we had fun. We were able to like make fun, and it made sense. Like, it was a good game.
Good game.
Yeah, conceptually, it was very strong, and I think that's what gave us the stuff to hang this really amazing story on. And I think it conveyed that family of choice, strength, and beauty to that in a way that is really powerful and should be, celebrated. That's a wonderful thing, and I think it did that. And it was a lot. I mean, it was a hell of a lot of fun.
Yeah, I second that. Just one other miscellaneous comment. This game says in the text that it's meant for an episodic format, and I think it could suit that really well, but it needs more support for what that means and how to, like, what is an episode and what that kind of might look like, and like temporal jumps, or like you could have a support for an episodic thing that helps you focus the episode in some way. Like, I think we tossed around in the first session highlighting stats, but there's lots of other ways you could do it. Because that's playing against like what Apocalypse World often does, where you just keep spiraling with more complications and more complications. There might need to be some thought behind that as well.
B, do you have a cool finale thing?
I just had fun playing this 4-session game, so I'm very happy and content. So yeah,
Yeah,
thank you for the design in the game and the experience.
Yes, thank you very much. I think a lot of what I've written down, a lot of what we said today, is a lot about building support in for the concepts that we really liked, which is awesome. Like, I think that's such a good. I've played games before where halfway through you're like, oh, it's a perfectly functional game. It's just no fun, and this is not that, and that's wonderful. So I guess at this point, given that it's 10 to 11 or 10 to 4 a.m. wherever people are, I will say goodbye. We'll end this broadcast. I'd like to end by echoing that, which V did and reminded me of, and makes me very happy. Thank you, Nora, so much for designing this and letting us play with it. It was a beautiful space to play in with some beautiful people. Your characters, I mean. Although also y'all, but I mean, when I say beautiful people, I mean you're beautiful, wonderful characters. I love you. Goodbye.